Thanks everyone, great stuff, great to see you here. Now we're excited that Pete's here, and one of the reasons is that he's launched a new book on prayer called How to Pray, a guide for normal people, which is most of us here this evening. And so we're just going to hear a little bit from the book now, and Poppy's going to come and read to us. So let's have a round of applause for Poppy. Thank you so much.
Some of our closest friends invited us to join them in Croatia, sailing a catamaran around the Adriatic. It was to be the holiday of a lifetime. By day, we ploughed through sapphire seas under powder blue skies, weaving in and out of the dramatic Cornati archipelago. At night, we moored in perfect coves, diving, swimming, and playing cards by lamplight under the brightest stars you ever saw. It was a magical week. One evening, we dropped anchor in a particularly beautiful natural harbour, and the kids dived into the sea, as usual. By the time we hauled them out, wrapped them in soft towels, and settled down to supper, dusk was bathing the entire bay in a golden sheen. Everyone looked relaxed, tanned, and happy. Everything was perfect until a dark, swirling cloud of mosquitoes materialised above our heads. I'm aware, as I recount this story, that you may not be entirely sympathetic to our plight. You may even be thinking, good, and praising God for those mosquitoes. But back on that boat, we definitely were not. In fact, my friend James immediately began to pray against them. Lord, he said, lifting one hand like Moses, preparing to part the Red Sea, and using the other to swat his own face. We ask you to just remove these wretched mozzies right now in the name of Jesus. Everyone else on the boat, 2 mums, 5 kids, heartily agreed with the prayer. Their eyes were closed, heads nodding, hands raised to rebuke Satan's little airborne militia. But my eyes were not closed, my head did not nod, but it seemed such a silly prayer for 3 important reasons. My first objection was theological. God must surely be a bit too busy with big world problems, like the Middle East and wars and famines and stuff, to worry about optimizing the alfresco dining arrangements of posh people on yachts in the Adriatic. My second objection was environmental. Mosquitoes are presumably part of God's finely tuned ecological order, and Christians aren't immune from the laws of nature. We don't surrender our insect repellents as conversion. We don't rise from the baptismal waters and keep rising, liberated from the laws of gravity. My third objection was pastoral. Our kids were joining in with James's prayer, and so when, not if, it didn't work, tiny grains of doubts and disappointment would surely be sown within their impressionable minds, and they would grow up to become Satanists. And so, as everyone else prayed, rebuking the spirit of midginess in the name of Jesus, I smiled stoically, swatting mosquitoes until they all said, Amen. But as they did so, the most annoying and unfortunate thing occurred. At that precise moment, a gentle breeze arose and swept the mosquitoes away to some other, doubtless less prayerful yacht. A chorus of praise erupted from our boat. Everyone was suddenly grinning and thanking God for hearing their prayers, for caring about his kids, and yes, for making the night's perfect alfresco dining arrangements just that little bit more perfect. When you pray about the small things in life, you get to live with greater gratitude. To this day, I don't know whether that was an actual proper answer to prayer or just a well-timed meteorological fluke masquerading as one. But this I do know, and I know it for sure. When you pray about the small things in life, you get to live with greater gratitude. If you only pray about big, ugly, gnarly problems that seem onerous and serious enough to warrant divine intervention, you will only very occasionally experience miracles. But when you learn to pray about trivia, ridiculous incidentals like, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil midges, and even inevitabilities like, give us this day our daily bread, in a land that's full of the stuff, you start to notice how many minor miracles are scattered abroad in this course of an average day. As Archbishop William Temple famously said, "When I pray, coincidences happen. When I stop praying, the coincidences stop happening." It is by asking more for lesser things that we rediscover how to live with the wide-eyed wonder of children. By filling our days with tiny prayers, we relinquish our sense of entitlement and receive each detail as a blessing, each coincidence as a minor miracle, training our neural pathways to rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus.
Thank you so much, Poppy. Really, really appreciate it. Well, without further ado, would you welcome your host and guest? It's Rachel Riddle and P. Greig.
Thanks, Nigel.
That's just so powerful. Thank you.
Perfect entrance music. Thanks. It's so great to have Pete Greig with us, isn't it?
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Just a little bit starstruck. So if I start giggling a little bit in a little bit silly way, just ignore me and push on. But if you're here and you think, who is Pete Greig? Then let me just. And if I wandered into some parallel universe, Pete is he started with a team of people, the 24/7 prayer movement, and that's 20 years old. I know he doesn't look old enough, but 20 years old this year, so exciting. He is the author of many books and also the lead pastor of Emmaus Church in Guildford, Surrey, and also he's a dog lover, which is really good.
Yeah.
And we can bond over that, because I also
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Cats?
Nah.
They kind of meow.
No, dogs in Bristol. We love dogs. Pete, congratulations on the 20-year anniversary. I suspect when you started, you could not envisage that this movement would have started and gone around the world like it has. So it's amazing, with God's help, of course. And thanks, Nigel. And you've also got a new book out called How to Pray. Nigel was talking about it. Tell us why you wrote that book.
It's so lovely. Thank you, Rachel. It's so lovely to be here. I was reminiscing. It was, I think, maybe as much as, well, it's over 20 years ago. I used to come and speak at an event called The Mix in here. Anyone? And we had one famous one where Channel 4 was in here filming. I just pray to God that none of the footage still exists. But
it's bound to be somewhere. It does.
It does. Oh, good. And before I answer your question, thank you so much to, especially to Woody's for organising tonight. It's really kind of you. Thank you for coming. I'm a bit overwhelmed by just how many people have come on a Thursday night. So thank you so much for that. And in all seriousness, someone coming in from outside, the sort of legacy of prayer, particularly, but service right across the city from this church has been astounding and has changed lives over many years. So it's great to be here. So now your question.
Yes.
Why did I write the book? I wrote the book because, well, we've been praying non-stop for 20 years. And everywhere I go in the world, people say that their kind of guilty secret is they find prayer really difficult. And could they have a bit of help with it? And lots of the books that are out there are kind of specialist, they're niche, or they're just into one kind of prayer. Like some people are really into Richard Rohr and contemplative prayer, and some people are into sort of Dutch sheets and intercession. And I just wanted something that was for everyone, and that's why it's called A Simple Guide for Normal People. And when I asked Nicky Gumbel to write the foreword. And one of the reasons I asked Nicky to do it is he's the guy behind Alpha. And, lots of people are coming to know Jesus through Alpha. And, of course, the next step is to grow in your relationship with God, to learn to walk with him, talk with him, listen to him, and so on. So it's all about prayer. And so I said to Nicky, would you write the foreword? And he said, yeah, I'd love to. And
great impression.
And he said, I'm so glad you've called it How to Pray, because he emphasizes really weird words in sentences. And I said, oh, good, because my American publishers had I didn't want me to call it that because they said it was too generic and boring and no one would buy it. And Nikki said, no, it's great title. And I'm going to stop the accent now.
I'm worried about a thunderbolt coming.
The reason is, Nikki writes this thing, some of you will know, called The Bible in 1 Year. It has 2 million users. It's the biggest devotional on YouVersion, that massive app. And the single most downloaded day out of the 365 in the year, every single year, is the one entitled How to Pray. So there's real evidence that this really is the question that people are asking. Maybe that's why so many people are here tonight. And I thought, look, after 20 years, after making lots of mistakes, going through, to be honest, our share of suffering and pain and disappointment as well, and seeing incredible miracles, at times I really think touching on revival dynamics in certain parts of the world, I just thought, let's try and get it together in a simple book. So that's the book, that's the plan.
Thank you, thanks. And that's what Poppy was reading from. Now, I think you said...
She read brilliantly,
she was
wherever
great,
you are,
wasn't she?
Poppy. That was
yeah,
great.
She did a great
you.
job. Thanks, Poppy. You mentioned that a lot of us probably feel like we're not very good at prayer, and I've been a Christian for a long time, and I also feel that I'm not very good at prayer, and I thought I'd get to this stage of my life, and I think, I've kind of got good at that. But most of us don't feel that. So I'd like you, in 10 words, to give us your best advice on prayer.
Wow. This is challenging. I can do it. I can do it in 9 words.
Even better.
The best advice I ever got on prayer is 9 words. It's keep it simple, keep it real, and keep it up. It's 10 words, isn't it? Keep it simple, keep it real, keep it up. And that is good advice. One of the great distinctives of the teaching of Jesus compared to many of the other teachers of his day was this call to simplicity in prayer. And we so easily get terribly complicated about it. But prayer, kids naturally pray. And there is something very simple about it. The second thing is keep it real. Be honest with God. Do you remember Jesus told that lovely parable? You imagine he's got the crowd around him about the 2 men who went up to the temple to pray, and one's a Pharisee and the other's a tax collector. Whee, boo! And the tax collector is there like strutting. God, I thank you that I am not like other men eyeballing the tax collector. And then Jesus describes the tax collector kind of rocking in the corner, and he's sobbing. He hasn't got the right words. He definitely didn't feel good at prayer. And he's just saying, "Have mercy on me, a sinner." And then Jesus, with a twinkle in his eye, and I imagine him winking at a couple of the Pharisees, said, "Who do you think went home heard by God then?" And so there's an incredible call in the scriptures to be real with God in prayer. You always will feel like a failure in prayer. Just get over it. That's okay. You're never going to pray enough. But let's try and grow in our relationship with God. I'm not really into prayer. I'm really into Jesus, so I talk to him and I try to listen to him. And people call it prayer, but it's not that I want to do this religious thing called prayer. I want to know and be known by God. And then keep it up. You know, we actually do have to persevere, and we don't find this easy, especially in this day and age. But sometimes you just mustn't give up praying too soon. There was a great educationist called Frank Laubach who taught millions of people to read, and was a wonderful Christian. And he once said, it's a bit like standing on the edge of a swamp, and you throw a rock in and it sinks without trace. So you throw another one and it sinks without trace. So you keep throwing in rocks. It seems utterly pointless. But he said if you do it long enough, eventually a rock will appear above the surface. And then eventually you'll create a pathway through the swamp. And so maybe my very simple message is keep chucking rocks at the swamp. Some of you have been praying into certain things for years. Jesus told one parable explicitly to say, you must always pray and not give up. So keep it simple, keep it real, and keep it up. That's my very simple advice.
That's really helpful, thank you. In the book, you have a really great acronym that you've used to help people pray, and it's a new one to me. Did you make it up?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. And it's better than the one that I used to use, I was taught in Sunday school, that you mentioned earlier. So tell us what that is, because I think it's such a helpful tool.
I'm not really that into acronyms generally, because it smacks of sort of geography textbooks and over-earnest curates. But this one is quite helpful. And if it's useful to you, grab it and use it. And it's simply, so I was thinking, how do we just, you know that bit where you sit down to have a pray and you think, what on earth do I do again? This will help you a little bit. And the reason I'll tell you what it is in a minute. The reason I sort of came up with it, I suppose, is also that the one that people use in Sunday schools, this beggars belief. This would only happen in the church. We teach children acts. Just raise your hand if you learnt acts. Adoration, confession, thanksgiving and
supplication.
Like a word nobody, even J.K. Rowling, doesn't use. And we teach it, tell our kids this is how to pray. So I thought, God, there's got to be something better than acts. And I thought, I wonder if we can do something with P.R.A.Y. Because I'm a bear, I like Winnie the Pooh, I'm a bear of very few brains. And I sort of came up with this.
Can I ask you how long it took you to come up with that? Was it?
Yeah, it's about probably about 25 minutes.
Oh, wow, impressive, that's good, thank you.
The last one was, why was the tricky one, but here you go. It goes pause, I'll go through it in a second. Pause, rejoice, ask, yield. And if you're teaching it to kids, swap that tricky word yield for yes, okay? So here it goes like this. Pause, be still and know that I'm God. Just don't rush into prayer. Just stop for a minute and breathe deeply. Some people encourage, just use a prayer phrase there to help center your scattered senses on the presence of God. He was already present, it's you that wasn't. The Franciscans, the phrase is, my God and my all. My God and my all. Some people pray in tongues at that point. The point here isn't so much the words, but it's centering your thinking. So pause. Let me tell you a tiny story about that one. I have to travel a fair bit, and when our boys were little, sometimes I'd been away for a couple of weeks. I'd come through the front door, and I'd put down my suitcase and hang up my jacket. I'd hear the boys upstairs, like yelling, and I'd call up. This is my great return. I've been away for 2 weeks. And without missing a beat, sometimes I would hear this back down the stairs. Dad, tell him to share. Or, what's for supper? And I'd go, hello, no, nice to be back. And you'd hear this pause, and then suddenly go, oh yeah, the old man's been away. And they'd come downstairs, they'd look at me, they'd then give me a little hug, and then they'd say, what's for supper? Now, I do think with God sometimes we're a bit like that. We barge into his presence. God, tell him to share and what's for supper. And I think sometimes he just quite likes us to come downstairs, look at his face and give him a hug. So pause. We could talk more about that, the book does. Rejoice. We're told rejoice always. Again, I say rejoice. That primes you for the next bit, which is asking, because you ask against a backdrop of all that God has done. You don't find faith for the things God hasn't done yet out of nowhere. You find faith for the things God hasn't done yet out of celebrating the things he has done. You don't clench your buttocks and try and believe 3 impossible things before breakfast. You identify the things he's done and think, well, if you can do that, maybe you can do something else. That's where you get faith from, okay? And so what does rejoicing mean? You might read a psalm. Isn't it incredible? This is like Indiana Jones stuff. We have the prayer book, much of it written by King David, used by Jesus Christ. It's there. It's pretty good. And by the way, the Psalms that you don't quite get, those are the best ones. Those are the ones that provoke you to maybe think outside your own cultural stereotypes and outside your weather patterns and hormonal whatevers, right? So use a psalm, listen to some worship music, count your blessings. Just spend a bit of time giving thanks to God. And then ask. I don't need to tell you about that. We're all really good at that one. And we've all got stuff we need to ask God for. And Jesus invites us to do that. The Father loves to give good gifts to his kids. And then yield. This is the bit in the prayer time where you just surrender again to God. Romans 12, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. This is the bit where you listen to God. God, what are you telling me to do? I'll go anywhere, I'll do anything. You're the boss, I'm not. This might be the bit where you confess some sin. I'm sorry, God, I've messed up. But P.R.A.Y. And one mum said to me that she said, I did that with your P.R.A.Y. thing with my 6-year-old last night, and we had the best prayer time we've ever had. I said, that's amazing. Tell me about it. How did it go? She said, well, pause isn't easy with a 6-year-old. I said, no, it's not. And she said, well, we just cuddled up, and I got him to do some deep breaths. And, good sort of 7, maybe 8 seconds. So it's a pretty major achievement for a 6-year-old. And then rejoice, we just said thank you to Jesus for some stuff. Then we had some stuff we wanted to ask him. And then we said, what might Jesus be asking us to do tomorrow? And then we told him we'd do it. And she said it was the best prayer time we've ever had. So this really does work. It works in groups. You can do it even in entire prayer meetings. So I've just got this slight hope. I might be totally deluding myself that in sort of 50 years' time, people won't have a clue like who I am or anything about 24/7. But I just love the thought that children might be being taught pause, rejoice, ask, yes. And they might not have to learn that the word supplication means please.
Thanks, Pete. In your book, you also talk a little bit about contemplative prayer, which I think for most of us, some of us that will be really new. We won't really know what that is. Some of us will find it really hard to do because we find it really hard to slow down in our culture and be still and quiet. And also, I think you've got into a bit of deep water in some places in the world about this. Facebook's an interesting place, isn't it, to get into trouble and social media. And
yeah, you've seen that, have you?
Yeah, I watched that. I watched the Enneagram social media.
I also mentioned the fact my wife, read a book on the Enneagram, and man, the vitriol. Some people really hate the Enneagram. And other people worship it. And I want to encourage you, don't hate and don't worship it. Just think it might be a tool that could help you love people and understand yourself a bit better. Anyway,
but let's not get sidetracked by Enneagram. Sorry, I should have mentioned that.
Let's not go there.
But contemplative prayer and your teaching on that, can you tell us a little bit more about that in your book? Because I think it's something that's a bit of a hidden gem in prayer. Yeah,
it's essential that we grow in contemplative prayer. And we've just refilmed a thing we call the prayer course, partly to add a session on contemplative prayer. But some people do get terribly worried about it. They think it's New Age and dodgy and all the rest of it. It's actually ancient Hebrew Christian practice and belief, deeply rooted in the Bible. The Bible talks about meditating on God's word. As I said earlier, it talks about being still in order to know God's presence. And the thing with contemplative prayer, in a moment I'll just give you some tips on how to do it.
Yeah, great.
But that actually, I want to suggest that everybody already does contemplation. They just might not realize it. I'll give you a couple of examples. But that, for example, that time, if those of you who go to church regularly, where it goes into worship and the first song comes up, but actually you're thinking about the annoying drive you had here and worrying about something at home, and you're trying to get into it, but you're not really thinking about the words. Is that just me? First time around? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then it goes on a bit, and you actually start to get into it. You start to be drawn in. Yes, you start to really feel it and focus on the Lord, and your reality starts to fade away, and the reality of what you're singing about grows. And then sometimes it's really wonderful and a great worship time. And thank you, by the way, that amazing worship time earlier. You get what Charles Wesley called lost in wonder, love, and praise. You lose your awareness that you're in a room with a bunch of people. You're caught up in the presence of God. Now that really is the contemplative journey. One bishop said it goes like this. It starts with me and God, step one. Then it goes God and me. The center of gravity is shifted, that's step 2, and then it's only God. So, even if you're not a Christian, you do this at the cinema, okay? Here's how it works. You turn up at the cinema, and you've got your popcorn and your Coke, the film starts going, there's someone being really annoying, whispering, and their phone's on behind you. You're trying to concentrate, you're eating your popcorn, but you're like, I'm going to get into this film. I've paid good money, I want to understand the plot, I want to get into it. So that's me and the film. Then, as the film continues, if it's even half decent, you move from me and the film to the film and me. In other words, you stop being aware of the person behind you. You may even forget your Coke and your popcorn for a while because you're really into it. You're still kind of vaguely aware, I'm at a cinema or watching a film, but you're into it. That's the film and me. And then step 3, if it's not just a good film, if it's a great film, you forget you're in the cinema. You forget you're watching actors on a screen. You get so caught up in the story that actually you are utterly there. It's the great cathartic experiences. And those are the moments people come out going, that was an incredible movie. And it is a rumor. It is a hint and a whisper that we as humans were made for something beyond ourselves, that what we pursue in life are those moments where we transcend ourselves and get caught up in something bigger than ourselves. It's not just cinema, great sporting euphoria, sex, great art, lingering conversations with dear friends where you lose track of the time. These are the great moments in life, and they are deeply contemplative. So the question is, how do we do this as Christians in prayer? I got someone in our church who's a very senior businessman, and he works very, very hard, and he got adrenal failure. And his doctor said to him, you've got to change your lifestyle, change your diet, and you've got to practice mindfulness. And he started reading all these books on mindfulness, which were basically Buddhism filtered through pop psychology. And he asked me if it's what I thought about it. I looked at them, I said, they're not great. And I realized as his pastor I'd failed him because I had never taught him from the Bible how to be present, how to be mindful, how to know God and be still, be centered. And so we need to learn how to do it. And so the book talks about it, but simply put, you start with me and God. That's the bit where you're working to focus on God. You might use a Bible verse. You might focus on an object, but it's you deliberately focusing on God's presence. And then as you push in, it stops being work, it becomes easier as it becomes God and me. You start to be caught up in the meaning of that Bible verse, in the lyric of that song, in the beauty of that picture, or whatever it is. And then sometimes you will move, as it were, from meditation to contemplation into what I call communion. And those are the moments where you're outside of time, but overwhelmed with a sense of God's presence and his love. And those are the most amazing times. So this is a kind of praying that's not verbal, but is all about the love of God and being present to the presence of God. That's contemplative prayer, and it's an essential part of growing as Christians. I believe when Jesus climbed mountains and spent all night praying, he wasn't talking all the time. Sometimes he was just being in the presence of his Father.
Thanks, Pete. It's really whetting my appetite to go home and do some contemplative prayer. You mentioned a minute ago of the prayer course that you've just relaunched and redone. And do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? I think we have a little video.
Oh, we've got a video. Okay,
to
great.
Whet your appetite. Should we just play the video? That'd be great. Take a look.
Same jacket. Wow. That's the prayer course. Give me a wave. Has anyone here done the prayer course? Okay, a few of you. So we made this thing. Originally it was a 6-week course. It's now an 8-week course. You just get like a video on different types of prayer. So it looks at adoration, petition, intercession, spiritual warfare, unanswered prayer, listening to God, all these kinds of different kinds of prayer. And there's a video with, like, say, 15, 20 minutes to just get you thinking. And then there's discussion starters you can download for free, and stuff you can do, like how do I now go and do this kind of praying. And so we originally filmed that in a couple of days and pretty much wrote the material on the back of an envelope, and it went mad. It's like over 1 million people have used the prayer course. And so we thought we'd better refilm it because, partly there's a couple of sessions we wanted to add, like the one on contemplative prayer, as I just said, and partly because I was telling a group earlier, in the first edition, they told me there's 6 episodes, so you've got to wear 6 different shirts. And my 6th shirt, I found out I only owned 6 shirts. My 6th shirt is one that my wife had banned me from wearing to Tesco's because it's just a really bad, horrible shirt. And she's ashamed to be married to me when I wear it. And anyway, it's the day of the filming, and she was out, and I just thought that puppy's gonna, you're gonna have to come. So that's the one I wore for spiritual warfare. And the great news is that Tesco's in Guildford has been spared, but the bad news is 1 million other people haven't. So it wasn't just to sort out my wardrobe, but we thought we should refilm it, and so we've redone it, and it's just a free resource that you can do in small groups and churches and so on. And I think it's increasingly available in lots of different languages as well. And what happens is the book, the How to Pray book, dovetails in with it. So you can just do the course, but if you want to go a bit deeper, then each chapter of the book actually fits with that, if that makes sense. Yeah. So hopefully that's a resource to help with this oldest question of all, Lord, teach us to pray.
Thanks, that's helpful. And we're going to start it next week in our home group.
Awesome.
I'm not just saying that because I'm here. We are going to do it. We're going to do it. So you called this the Rising Tide Tour. Why have you called it the Rising Tide Tour?
We are at the most extraordinary time in the UK, and I'm not just talking all the stuff that's going on in Westminster. And the trouble is that our main news outlets aren't going to tell us what's going on, and we have to gather as a people of God and actually understand what is happening. And what we are seeing in this nation, which is probably the opposite of the signals that we tend to receive from the media, is that the tide, the spiritual tide, is absolutely categorically, empirically, definitely, measurably rising in the nation. I just wanted to get out and tell people that. And let me just walk you through some facts. First of all, the Times newspaper commissioned YouGov to do some research last year. They published the research in December in the Times, which discovered the following. 1, atheism is declining at a rate of 2 to 3% per annum and has been for the last 3 years. Now that's the opposite of what we're sort of vaguely feeling, which is atheism is in mass revival and everyone wants to be an atheist. It's the exact opposite of what's happening. Secondly, the church attendance in the UK is growing. It is growing. And that has been happening for a number of years in London. And for a while they tried to dismiss it as, it's just the black majority churches, but it isn't. I had the privilege of being one of the leaders at HTB for many years. When I preached there on a Sunday, I'd do 7 or 8 services and ride a bicycle between venues. By the end of the day, you didn't even know what your name was. And I mean, it's amazing what's happening. But now that is spreading to major cities like Bristol. There are still some challenges in the rural areas, for sure. Some of those are socioeconomic more than spiritual, to be honest. But the YouGov poll, commissioned by the Times, isn't like a Christians have commissioned some Christians to do some research, or this isn't like Chinese whispers. Is proper research commissioned by mainstream organizations. Church attendance is growing, and prayerfulness is growing in the nation as well. And so that we see that all the time. I'd really encourage you, if you haven't already, to listen to Russell Brand does this great podcast. The comedian Russell Brand does this great podcast called Under the Skin. If you're sensitive about language, he uses the F-bomb a lot, so don't. But if you can handle that, it's really interesting. Listen to the one where he interviews Brené Brown. These people between them have millions and millions of followers. And they talk about atheism. And she says, I once looked into that dark abyss and I cannot go there again. It is too terrifying. And he goes, you're completely right. This isn't Christians necessarily talking between themselves. This is just the buzz that is increasingly out there, because anyone who's ever been to a hospice knows there's not a lot of hope in the worldview that says your life is meaningless, there is no consequence, and it's the survival of the fittest, and if you're weak and you're suffering, you should jolly well die out of the gene pool. That is not good news. We have good news that there is a God who made you and loves you. There is an explanation for this stunning beauty in this world and this stunning goodness in the world, and there is hope, and God came in Jesus Christ, and he loves you and can forgive you and put your life and your family back together. And even if life sometimes hurts like hell, we have hope for eternity. That's our message.
Yes.
It's time we realized it. So, and then and it's not just, the Financial Times released an article in April that said what probably we already know, which is, in an age of austerity, guess who is stepping in and filling the gaps at a local level when statutory bodies can no longer afford to deliver? It was like this big discovery for the FT. It's the church, and we're like, And what does that look like? I was with the new wine leaders in Wales recently, and after one of the sessions I was sitting around in a hotel, and all these different pastors were sharing story after story after story of people coming to know Jesus in Wales, not just in the obvious places, but in the north, in the middle, in the valleys, all around, different traditions, different denominations. They weren't showing off. It was like one was saying, oh, the most lovely thing has just happened outside TK Maxx. I led a whole family to Jesus, and they tell the story, and then someone else says, oh, I can beat that. We've just seen this. And it was going on. I was like, this is incredible. What's happening in Wales? And I said, has this been happening a while? They said, yes, a little while. And I said, what's going on? They said, people are getting saved easier than they were 5 years ago. And not just in church meetings. And I said, what do you put it down to? And they said, such an interesting thing. They said, one, we've been in austerity longer than you guys. We've had a lot of poverty. And everyone locally knows that if anyone's going to help you, it's probably the church. The second thing is people have stopped going to church, and so when you talk to them, they don't have any religious baggage. They just think the church is the people who helped my granny or ran the food bank or whatever, so they're open to the gospel. So when you strip away the Times, YouGov, and FT, this is what's starting to stir in the nation. And then we're seeing churches planted at an incredible rate. Elim are planting wonderfully, Vineyard Church is planting wonderfully, the HTB network is planting wonderfully, and most recently here in Bristol. And anyone who's planting a church now, which by the way is extraordinary, because I remember a few years ago the Anglicans didn't believe in church planting. It's wonderful they now do. But anyone who's planting a church, if the leader is half sensible, doesn't have smelly breath, their church is growing. It's really wonderful. And then what we're also seeing is the greatest outpouring of prayer that our nation has seen in a generation right now. And I'm not just talking about 24/7, but our story is nuts in that we started one prayer room and it went viral, and we're now in half the nations of earth, and we've been going for 20 years non-stop. But it's much bigger than us. So many of you will have heard of the Thy Kingdom Come initiative. Well, Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, came up with this idea. He said, why don't we try and get people praying in 5 cathedrals on Pentecost Sundays 4 years ago? Tim Hughes and I said to him, it's a bit ambitious, like for a prayer meeting. Do you know how there's only 3 old ladies and a goat that come to most prayer meetings? Like, why don't we just try 1 cathedral? Cathedrals are big. And he had much more faith than us. Quite right, he's the Archbishop. And he said, no, we can do 5. And he was right. The 5 were packed. Winchester Cathedral was so full, we had to put screens outside because people couldn't fit in. And this wasn't to hear a speaker, wasn't to hear a band, it was to pray. And then the next year it grew. This last year we packed out Trafalgar Square. The thing spread into I can't remember how many nations around the world, and warehouses, cathedrals, all sorts. In this country alone we had well over 1 million people praying, let your kingdom come, come Holy Spirit, on Pentecost Sunday. Now listen, there are people who long to see this kind of outpouring of prayer and have not seen it. This isn't everything that we we are wanting. It's not everything we're praying for, but is it a beginning? You'd better believe it, because the history books and the Bible teach us that every major movement of the Spirit of God begins with a movement of prayer. And right now we are seeing an astounding movement of prayer in this nation, on our watch, in our time. So the tide is rising. People are getting saved easier. There is an outpouring of prayer. There is opportunity around austerity. Atheism is declining. Church attendance is growing. And as I travel around churches, what I find is this. If I say to everybody, there's some good news, they go, are you sure? Have you actually checked your facts? But if I say, aren't things terrible? They go, oh, I know. It's high time we started to believe our beliefs, doubt our doubts, believe that Jesus was telling the truth when he said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. God isn't insecure around atheists. He isn't saying, do I exist? He is in charge. He is with us. We are his people. Prayer works. The gospel works. And people are needing answers because they realize that politics and economics and the existing social structures, dare I suggest that even the value of their houses is no longer a reliable metric for security in the future, and people need answers, and there is an answer that is 2,000 years old, that shaped the very foundations of our nation, that have shaped the culture of our nation, and that is the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we are proud to be his people. The tide is rising. Let's begin to celebrate it and keep doing what we're doing. Sorry, Rachel, I do apologise. I meant to be being interviewed, and I got a bit carried away there. I'd be terrible on the Jeremy Kyle show, wouldn't I? But look, if you can't get excited about this stuff, you know, you're dead, aren't you, basically?
I think it's really helpful, Pete, because it's just reminding us what is reality, and actually what we hear in the media often is not the reality. And
I think they might have an agenda. Some people might have a slight agenda.
Yeah, I think you could be right about that.
Yeah.
But can I just ask an honest question? Because I totally believe all that you've said, and it's really stirring. But there is sometimes, some of us will have experienced tough things and will have had unanswered prayers. And I just think of my own life, and I know for you guys, there have been some tough things where you haven't seen necessarily the breakthrough that you've asked for. And I think, I don't want to kind of dampen the atmosphere, because I totally believe what you're saying, but the reality is we want to not kind of ignore the tough things. So what would you say to those that may be disappointed or frustrated with the way God hasn't responded to their prayers and the way that they would have wished? And we'll kind of come into land on that one, but I'd love to hear what you say.
Well, life is incredibly tough and can be profoundly painful. God can be really confusing. He isn't an algorithm. He's not a formula. There is a battle raging around us. And life can hurt like hell. And what I love is that the Bible is so honest about that. In fact, I would suggest the Bible is more honest about the frustrations and pain and disappointment of life than the church is. In the church, we often find it very hard to be honest about our disappointment and our pain and our struggles. But the Bible is shockingly so. The stuff they didn't bother redacting from the text is just amazing. I mean, one of my favorites is that, the great moment, the Great Commission, Jesus appears. It says, and when they saw him, they worshipped. Obviously, he's resurrected from the dead. And it said, but some doubted. Plural, but some doubted. Like, that's a really bad thing. If you're doing a PR exercise, don't admit that. But then even those who doubted got commissioned to go and be apostles and ended up dying for their faith in something they doubted when they first saw it, which is exactly the way many of you struggle with unbelief. So the Bible is so honest. The Psalms especially, half to two-thirds of the Psalms are lament. And the future is not sort of magnolia reality where we just sort of aren't too excited or too disappointed. The future is in primary colors. It is to be as excited as I just was about the goodness of God and to be as honest about the pain of life. That's the way the Bible is written. It's both, sometimes in the same chapter. And it's the Easter weekend. It's the agony of Good Friday and the joy of Easter Sunday within, hours of each other. And so many will know my story, and others will have their own stories, and many will have suffered much, much more than us. But a year or so into the prayer movement, I think we were probably a bit arrogant. Like, we were seeing so many answers to prayer. I just thought we found the revival switch. And as long as everyone just does this, like, Jesus is going to be back by breakfast time, And then, my wife, to cut a long and very painful story short, when our second son was 7 weeks old, was diagnosed with a brain tumor, a very large one. And we had to live for quite a while without knowing whether they could operate. And I remember putting the kids to bed at night, thinking, I wonder if I one day have to show them photographs and try and describe their mum to them. And I think I went, and I watched Sammy slip into many, many epileptic fits. And of course I prayed, God, make them stop. And it almost never worked. And people sort of try to say, oh, well, maybe God's trying to teach you something. You think, what, trying to teach me? Like, that's like me hurting my children and to teach them. I mean, how does that? And even if it was, like, how's he going to teach me something through this seizure that he couldn't have taught me through the previous 30? And it's a very agonizing time. And, we've been so, I don't know if it's lucky or blessed, it's probably both. But they were able to operate. Sammy is alive still. She survived with almost all of her sort of faculties intact, and the epilepsy is almost under control now. Lots and lots of drugs, but she still has a chronic illness. And so I think I went from thinking my prayers could save the world to thinking my prayers can't even stop my wife having a fit. And I really quickly learned that discipleship is living with that paradox that doesn't deny all the miracles and good stuff God does do, but also is honest about the pain and the suffering of life. And some people go one way or the other. I've noticed some people go really cynical. They get so badly hurt, they just say, God isn't there, or if he is there, he doesn't love me, or if he claims to love me, he's not really that powerful and prayer doesn't work. And then other people go superficial instead of cynical, and they pretend everything's fine when actually they are breaking apart. And I had this friend at university called Captain Scarlet, we called him, and he believed in health and wealth teaching, and all that stuff. And I remember one time he had a bad back, and I said, how's your back? And he said, hallelujah, it's been healed. So I gave him a little hug. I was so happy. And he went, ow! And I said, I thought you said it had been healed. And he said, it has, but the symptoms prevail. Right? The number one gift God wants to give most charismatic Christians is common sense, So we got to live somewhere in the middle. And on the prayer course, and actually there's a whole chapter in how to pray on unanswered prayer, because I think we have got to be honest about that. And I don't think actually it puts anyone off faith. I think it actually, Israel means the struggle. We are inviting people into the struggle. Romans 8 says that all creation is groaning for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed, and that the Holy Spirit is praying in groans that words cannot express. So there's groaning in heaven, there's groaning all around you on earth. That's the reality of life, and we know it. And that's the place for the gospel to flourish.
Thank you. That's so helpful. And we've kind of come to the end of this little, sort of interview, but thank you so much for your wisdom, your insight, your books. I mean, I've read quite a few of your books, and they're just so honest and real. And I think it's like a breath of fresh air, especially on the things that are hard and we wrestle with. So can we just give Pete a really great round of applause?
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Okay, I tell you what, I'd love us just to pray, if that's all right. That would seem a sensible thing to do, and I don't want to sort of keep you too long, but I think it would be remiss of us not to do that. And I know, Jake, who's traveling with me, has got one or two words he senses from the Lord that he wants to share. Just before we do that, because I'm really rubbish at remembering the the practical stuff I'm supposed to say is, most of you should have had one of these on your seats. And all it is, you know, you'll have picked up by now, 24/7, we're just trying to make stuff to help churches pray and help individuals grow in their relationship with God. And there's 3 particular things, 2 of which you've heard about so far. So there's the book. We've got, I'm afraid they keep selling out in the warehouse, but we've got as many as we could possibly get. And so do get some today, and if not, they'll be on Amazon soon. But get the book. Secondly, do the prayer course if that will help you. That's free at prayercourse.org. And the third thing is there's an app that we've developed, which is a place that you can keep your prayer lists with photographs, scriptures, journal. You can record answered prayers and so on. And it cost us £100,000 to make. Someone came and paid for it, and we just want to give it to you. It's just free. There's no catch. So that's called Inner Room. So there's just 3 resources. We just want to, 2 of them are just free gifts, the prayer course and Inner Room, and the book. We can't find a way to afford to do that for free yet, so that's a few quid, but do get those. And if you're tonight thinking, I'm feeling this, I really want to grow in prayer, I really want to journey with these people, I need resources to help me, I may be feeling called to step up to the plate in prayer a bit more. What I'd love to encourage you to do is just fill in the 2 bits of details on the tear-off slip there, your name and email, and hand it in at the door here on the way out. And we'll just, it's simply so that we can get in touch with you, we can send you stuff, we can encourage you, and we just sense that the Lord is raising people up throughout the nation with a real call to pray, and we want to identify those people and support them and encourage them and hear from them. So that's all that is. And if you think, yeah, that'd be good, you can unsubscribe at any point. We won't spam you, but just fill that in and hand it in at the door, and that's a way of continuing the journey together. It'd be great to get the band back, if possible.